This week's parsha is the most important parsha in the entire Torah. You may ask, why is this week's parsha the most important in the entire Torah? Well, let me tell you. Parashah Pekudei brings us to the conclusion of the book of Shemot. We read about the assembly of the Mishkan, we get a detailed accounting of all the materials used, and learn how a cloud over the Mishkan by day and a fire by night would guide the nation on their journey. But none of that is why this is the most important parsha in the Torah. The reason this is the most important parsha is because it teaches us about the nature of beginnings and endings. The details of the construction of the Mishkan span most of the last 5 parashot. To put that in perspective, the story of the Exodus, from which the book gets its English name, spans the first 4 parashot. The construction of the Mishkan takes up more space than the story of the Exodus. So with so much attention paid to the construction of the Mishkan, you'd think it would be easy to answer the question of when exactly the construction of the Mishkan begins and when it ends. Putting aside the question of the exact chronology of the events of the book, we seem to have several candidates for what we could say is the beginning of the Mishkan. We could say the Mishkan began in chapter 25, when Hashem commanded Moshe to make me a Mishkan that I may dwell among them. Or maybe that's too abstract. The Mishkan really began over the next 5 chapters when Hashem describes to Moshe in detail exactly how to build it. Or maybe it began in chapter 30 when Moshe describes the vision to the people. Or maybe in chapter 31 when Moshe names the craftsmen who will oversee the work. Or maybe in chapter 35 when the people donate the materials needed. Or maybe in chapter 36, when the work of construction actually begins. If you're building yourself a new home, when does that new home become a thing? Is it when you first have the initial idea? Is it when you draw a couple sketches? When you engage an architect? When you have actual blueprints? When you put the shovel in the ground? When you make your first payment? It's hard to say. Each of those is a beginning, but which is the beginning is a matter of personal perspective. How concrete does something have to be before we say it actually exists? The same question of exactly when is the origin of the Mishkan applies to the world itself. There's a disagreement in the Talmud between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua about when the world was actually created. Rabbi Eliezer says the world was created in Tishrei, in the season of Rosh Hashanah. And Rabbi Yehoshua says the world was created in Nisan, at the season of Passover. The disagreement is clarified many generations later when Rabbeinu Tam comes with the idea that the rabbis of the Talmud weren't arguing about chronology, they were arguing about definitions. What constitutes creation? Everyone agreed that Tishrei is when Hashem first thought about creating the world, and Nisan is when that thought was put into action. Both of these are acts of creation, but the rabbis of the Talmud we're arguing about which of these constitutes the actual beginning. Okay, so beginnings are hard, but what about endings? Surely we know when the construction of the Mishkan ends, but looking at this week's Parsha, we keep coming across passages that seem like endings. Right at the beginning of the Parsha, the second line we read, "Now Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, had made all that Hashem had commanded Moshe." That certainly sounds like an ending, but then the text goes on for 40 lines to give a detailed accounting of all of the materials used, only to then say, "Thus was completed all the works of the Mishkan of the tent of meeting. The Israelites did so just as Hashem had commanded Moshe, so they did." Seemingly another ending. Then all the components are brought to Moshe, and we read, "And when Moshe saw that they had performed all the tasks as Hashem had commanded, so they had done, Moshe blessed them." Sounds like another ending. But the Parsha continues with Hashem commanding Moshe to assemble all the components. And after he does so, we read, "In the first month of the second year, on the first of the month, the Mishkan was set up." Another ending. If you're building an IKEA bookshelf, something I've done many, many times, is the bookshelf done when the factory manufactures all the components? When those components are packaged together in a flat pack? When you bring it home and check to make sure all the pieces are there? When you assemble it? when you make sure there are no pieces left over, I think the parashah is saying no. The ending isn't when the construction is physically complete, because we have one more ending to actually read about. After the Mishkan is fully assembled, we read how Moshe set up all the utensils inside. He lit the menorah, burned the incense, set up the showbreads in the washing station, and placed the ark in the Holy of Holies. Only then, once the Mishkan was ready for holy use, do we read the actual ending. And the presence of Hashem filled the Mishkan. The bookcase isn't complete when it's assembled and placed against the wall. It's complete when its shelves are filled with holy books, so that we can use those books to fill our homes with Torah, just as the presence of Hashem filled the Mishkan. That is one reason why this is the most important parsha in the entire Torah, but the other reason is that the most important piece of Torah is whatever piece of Torah you have in front of you right now. Shabbat Shalom, and Am Yisroel Chai.